So it's our last session together. Time for a final exam, so to speak. I want you to imagine sitting on your couch, maybe sitting at home, your child, your grandchild comes to you. They want you to read a book. So they walk in carrying a big old picture book. And my computer's going to do the same thing it did earlier. There we go. They walk in with a big picture book, asking you to read it to them. So here's the question. Do we actually sit down and read this book? Or did we notice the very first word? Prehistoric. What does that word mean? Well, if you look it up, it actually means a time before man. A time before man. According to the Bible, how long was there before man? About 5 days. Ironically, we look in old dictionaries. 1766, we asked that question, where's the word prehistoric? Guess what? It's not there. In fact, we can move forward to one of Noah Webster's early dictionaries. The 1860s, we asked the same question. Where's the word prehistoric? Guess what? It's not there. You know why it's not there? Because, friends, up until just a few short years ago, we didn't believe there was a time before man. You see, everything that we're being given is packaged, it's presented, it's propaganda. I had a young man come up to me on a Saturday night. I was doing 2 lessons very similar to what I did last night, and he uttered these words. He said, just give me one piece of evidence. He said, I can't stay for your second lesson. I've got to work night shift. Can you give me something that I can take back to my biology class? And those of you who have been here this weekend, you know I don't have any trouble going for an hour or hour and a half. 5 minutes is different. For me, 5 minutes, I can't get my name out in 5 minutes. But I was thinking quickly, I asked the young man, I said, have you learned about the geologic column? He said, absolutely. He began to rattle off from memory some of the names. Jurassic period, the Triassic period, the Carboniferous period. I asked him this one question. I said, how did they come up with that? He kind of cocked his head. He looked at me and said, what do you mean? I said, well, you know the geologic column. How was it actually formed? He got this puzzled look. He said, they didn't teach us that. I said, you're right, they didn't teach you that. The reason they didn't teach you that is because this was formed in the 1800s based almost solely on assumptions. You say, Brad, how do you know that? Because 30 years ago, there was an explosion that quite literally has torn this geologic column all to pieces. Prior to the eruption of Mount St. Helens, we didn't have a clue of how long it took for canyons to form, so we assumed. We didn't know how long it took for stridal layers to be laid down, so guess what we did? We assumed. 30 years ago last May, Mount St. Helens erupted, and with it, quite literally, came all kinds of information on geology. This is the most studied volcano in human history. One day, quite literally changed everything. I'm going to give you an acronym that I hope you'll remember to help you remember some information that we've learned from this particular volcano. The acronym is simply SUPER, S-U-P-E-R. What we're going to look is each one of those letters representing a piece of information that we've learned from Mount St. Helens. We'll start with S, stridal layers. You know, we used to think that these layers were put down over millions and millions and millions of years. That's what the textbooks tell us. In fact, if you look here on the screen, you'll notice you've got sedimentary rock up here at the top and all the layering below it. The bluff you're looking at is about 120 feet tall. The reason I know that, my son and I, we actually stood right over here. We filmed a portion of a DVD in front of it. Now, evolutionists would have you believe that that sedimentary rock was laid down hundreds of millions of years ago. Folks, this was laid down in about 3 weeks, 30 years ago. Every bit of it. In fact, we've got video proof of lots and lots of different layers being put down in a very short amount of time. Take a look. Everything below the yellow line you see on the screen, that was put down in the original eruption, May the 18th, 1980. About a month later, there was a post-eruption that put down everything you see between the two yellow lines. 2 years after that, there was another post-eruption that put everything down on top of that top yellow line. My point being, everything you see right here was put down in 2 years. Not 2,000 years, not 200,000 years, not 2 million years, 2 years. But you look at it and you say, seriously, Brad, those rocks, they're gray, they look old. Folks, new rocks aren't pink and blue. Buddy of mine, Steve Austin, has done extensive work, Mount St. Helens. He actually took some of the lava dome, brand new rock, took it, sent it to some labs in the United States of America. He got ages as high as 2.7 million years old. From rock that we knew was less than 30 at that point. So the very first thing we learned from Mount St. Helens, even though you see those striatal layers on the side of the road where the interstate is cut through it, and your mind starts wondering, how could those have gotten here? We know today that a catastrophe can do it very quickly. The second thing, U, stands for upright walls. Just on the northeast side of Mount St. Helens, there's a lake called Spirit Lake. When the eruption happened, it washed, literally, hundreds of thousands, if not a million timbers down into Spirit Lake. A buddy of mine by the name of Steve Austin has done extensive work. He was there pretty soon after it happened. My son and I, we flew over Spirit Lake last year in a helicopter. There's still over 30,000 of these logs floating from the original eruption. If you look very carefully at the screen, you'll notice Dr. Austin and one of his colleagues in scuba gear. The reason being, they've actually taken cameras down and they filmed what's going on in Spirit Lake. He told me, he said, Brad, what we're seeing is these logs, they get really water saturated after many, many, many years, and then finally the heavy root end will sink and they bob standing straight up. We actually saw several of them standing straight up in the water until finally they become completely saturated and they sink standing straight up. He said it looks like a forest down there at the bottom of Spirit Lake. He said about every 2 or 3 years we get a little post-eruption that causes more sediment to be put down. He said, Brad, we're seeing some kind of a layering system with these trees standing straight up. Now, that's what he is recording as data at Spirit Lake, and that's what we see in the fossil record as well. Take a look very carefully at the screen. I want you to notice here at the bottom, there are 3 men standing at the bottom of a rock bluff. Those are 5 fossilized trees. But what I want you to notice is those trees are going through several different layers. How do you get a tree that starts out allegedly in the Carboniferous period that grows all the way up through the Triassic period? Folks, that's more than 200 million alleged years. Trees don't stick around for 200 million years, folks. They decay and rot. And yet, here's the funny thing. We've got these fossils, quite literally, all over the globe, going through several different layers. This one says, in Germany, France, the British Isles, Nova Scotia, California, several eastern states, fossils that extend through several layers of sedimentary rock have been found. These are called polystrate fossils. Folks, by themselves, these quite literally completely undo the geologic column. Because you should never have a fossil that goes through multiple layers that allegedly represent millions of years. And yet, these aren't in the textbooks. The P stands for peat formation. You say, okay, what's the big deal with that? We know today that one of the main precursors to making coal is peat. We also know that in the bottom of Spirit Lake, there's quite literally feet of peat. The reason being, the logs that you're looking at, there's not a stitch of bark on any of them. It's rubbed off. They've been bumping together on that lake now for 30 years. All the bark is down at the bottom where it's been covered over by more sediment. We now have a peat layer. What's the big deal with that? Folks, do you realize we're watching coal being formed at Mount St. Helens? We used to think it took 250 million years. We realize that's not the case anymore. P is for peat formation. E is for eroding canyons. If you had absolutely no knowledge of what I was talking about with Mount St. Helens, and I showed you this picture, and I asked you, how do you think those 600-foot canyons got formed? Well, we're always told that it's the rivers, right? Those rivers carve out those canyons over millions of years. The canyon you're looking at was formed in about a day and a half. The reason I know that, if you look very carefully, you'll know that when Mount St. Helens erupted, it didn't just go vertical, it also came out this way a little bit horizontally. Right before it did that, it was growing, the mountain was growing at a rate of 15 to 30 feet per day. It looked like a big zip. This side right here, all the snow and ice slid down into this valley, and then it erupted. So ask yourself, what happens to snow and ice when it comes in contact with lava? It immediately turned to steam. Steam had to go somewhere, and it quite literally blew out steam vents, canyons, in a day and a half. Now, folks, I want you to get that for just a moment. This is not my hypothesis. This isn't my opinion. This quite literally is data. We know this is how it happened. We videotaped it. We got all kinds of proof. And yet textbooks are still telling our kids, over millions of years, the Colorado River has carved out the Grand Canyon from solid rock. All right, let's look at this for just a moment. We know it's a fact that the Grand Canyon exists, right? Here's the problem. There's two different interpretations. We've got evolutionists who say it was formed slowly by a little water over lots of time, whereas a creationist would say, no, it was formed quickly by lots of water over a little time. In other words, creationists look at it and say, that's a catastrophe. The problem is, folks, evolutionists are trying to erase the line between what is fact and what is their interpretation. And so what do? They hijack the textbooks. And they tell our kids the Colorado River is cut through layer upon layer of rocks over millions of years. Remember what I told you last night? Water enters at 2,800 feet. The south rim is sitting at 6,900 feet. Folks, that means top of the canyon is a whole lot higher than the bottom. That means water would have had to flow uphill 4,000 feet in elevation. There's one thing, I'm not a hydrologist, but I do know this. I do know water seeks its lowest point, always. Number two, river only runs through the bottom. It doesn't run on top. So how did we carve out an area at an elevation of 6,900 feet? Here's one that somebody needs to tell me. If the river really carved that out, where's all the delta? The stuff that was in it, where'd it go? Because I'll tell you where it's not. It's not anywhere near that canyon. You know what a better explanation is? A more scientific explanation is that a catastrophe caused it. Whether it be a global flood or a massive lake breach, Folks, we got the evidence. Our kids just don't ever get to see it. The R in super stands for rapid recovery. You know, we thought, when Mount St. Helens blew, we thought it would be hundreds of thousands of years before everything would really come back. In fact, I remember reading scientific articles telling us that the chiroplastic flows, the lava zones, that it was going to take thousands upon thousands of years. We wouldn't see it in my lifetime. Well, guess what? That picture was taken in the blast zone of Mount St. Helens last year. Oh, yeah, it's back. In fact, here's the funny thing. You see the elk there? The elk were some of the first animals to come back. They got really, really sharp hooves. They were walking across the lava zones after it had hardened, and their hooves were actually breaking through the lava. And then elk do what elk do. They fertilized. And guess what started growing? Plants. And guess what the plants did? They attracted more animals. And within just a few short amount of years, already we got recovery. Now, why is that a big deal? Folks, to me it's not a big deal at all. But to an evolutionist who is basing everything on millions and billions of years, this is a problem. Because how in the world do you explain that? Now, here's a question for you to think about. We've got this evidence, this living laboratory, and yet our kids don't ever get to see it or hear it. Why? What is it that is preventing our students from learning the truth? Ask yourself this question. What is the one thing they've got to have a lot of? Evolutionists have got to have loads and loads of time. Folks, if you dismantle their geologic column, you just wiped away 500 million evolutionary years for them. That they need in order to try to convince you that we went from some slime to man. In fact, I want you to read with me a page that most of you won't read. I was able to talk to a lady in the back who is a school teacher. I'm going to show you a teacher's edition. And I told her, just like I would tell any of the Christian educators in this room, we are thankful for you because you're serving on the front line. But I want you to look at what they're fighting against, what kind of textbooks we've got that say, stress that the earth is thought to be at least 4.5 billion years old. Why do we stress that? Because, folks, without it, you're not going to get anywhere. Let's spend about 2 or 3 minutes talking about why any of this matters in the first place. I do a whole series on ethics and the value of human life. Because I think, believe it or not, I think they actually fit hand in glove. And here's why I say that. If you allow generation after generation to believe that all they've done is evolve from some ape-like creature, what do you think is their value for human life? Oh, I can tell you. I worked in the Vanderbilt ER a couple of years. Saw a guy shot 5 times in the abdomen, from neck to pelvis, 5 times. He was shot over a bag of chips. I watched people being brought in who were stabbed over things like tennis shoes. You want to talk about what are the fruits of atheism? What are the fruits of evolution? Folks, we're seeing it in our society. Because if you think to yourself, you know what, there really is no value in human life, then you know, why not clone a human being? Why not play with stem cells? Why not do anything? And yet, time and time again, we've got to bring our kids back, and we've got to remind them, yes, there is a God. Your life has purpose. You were created in the image and likeness of God, and then we've got to pour the evidence to them. For instance, most of you in this room have got magnets on your refrigerator. Some of you probably got pictures of your grandchildren. A couple of things we know about magnets. Number one, we know magnets lose their strength over time. Number two, we also know the earth has a magnetic field. You don't believe me? Ask a Boy Scout to hold up a compass. You know what it's going to point to? Not just north. Magnetic north. Number three, we know the Earth has lost 6% of its magnetism in the last 150 years. Scientific proof, you cannot refute it. Now folks, look at that for just a moment. We've lost 6% of our magnetism in 150 years. You know what that tells me? That tells me there is no way the Earth could be billions of years old because we wouldn't have any magnetism left. It also tells me that carbon dating, which is dependent on uniformity, is no good. Or what about the Sahara Desert? What can we learn as far as the age of the Earth from real science? We know right now the Sahara Desert is growing at a rate of a foot a year. A process we call desertification. In fact, if you look on the screen behind me, you'll notice the yellow area is where it used to be. The peach area is where it is today. This is the direction it's moving. About a foot a year. But again, we got to ask the question, if this Earth is big, how old is the Sahara Desert? We extrapolate backwards, we do some measurement, lo and behold, guess what we find out? It's only about 4,000 years old. You say, whoa, time out, Brad. Didn't you say last night you kind of implied the Earth was about, round numbers, about 6,000? Yep. What happened about 4,000 and put all our weather patterns in place? Global flood. I'll show you this picture because of two reasons. Number one, it's great proof for a young Earth. And number two, it shows part of the problem we're having right now in the education system. Let me explain. I highlighted a sentence. It says, for example, the Mississippi River deposits sediment at a rate of 80,000 tons an hour. I think everybody in here knows we are living in what's called the no child left behind era. It's left everybody behind. That's a whole other discussion. But here's the bottom line. Our kids have become professional test takers. Because think about it. What we do is we standardize test them to see where they're at. Correct? Again, you can't say amen, you at least say ouch. So our kids are learning to be factoid learners. Okay, there's two problems with that. Number one, does that do them any good with the Bible if all they're learning is factoids? Moms and dads, listen to me. There's a difference in our kids knowing facts of the Bible and developing a relationship with Jesus Christ. Remember that. So we got kids who are memorizing trivia, memorizing factoids, but they aren't thinking critically. And here's what I mean by that. Our student reads this particular page. You know what he does? He memorizes Mississippi River, 80,000 tons out. He's ready to take a test. A, B, C, or D. Give it to me. I'm ready. But he doesn't stop to think. If the Mississippi River is really depositing sediment at a rate of 80,000 tons an hour right here, how much further should that delta stretch out if this Earth really is 4.6 billion, with a B, years old? Well, that's pretty easy. There wouldn't be a Gulf of Mexico because it would have already filled in by now. Now, while we're talking about the Gulf, we know that the oceans, they're 3.6% salt water. So why don't our science textbooks talk about this little trivia to our kids? We know precisely how the salt gets there. Water evaporates up, clouds go over land, rain comes down, picks up salt minerals, deposits them in the ocean at a steady rate. We're sitting at 3.6. Folks, you may not like my math, but you could have gone from freshwater to saltwater in 5,000 years. Again, you know what that tells me? That tells me there's absolutely no way this Earth is billions of years old. It's foolishness to think that because the oceans will be far too salty to sustain life. Hey, we just look around us. We see all kinds of examples. Most of you in here have probably been to Niagara Falls. In fact, those of you who maybe you stood on the Canadian side, you've looked at the beautiful falls. A couple of things I want you to think about. You know, as water is rushing over the falls, it wears off that leading edge, right? Because that's what water does. Water is one of the most powerful forces around. Okay, but think about this for just a moment. It has been wearing back the falls at a rate of 4.7 feet this screen. You can see where the leading edge of the falls was. Okay, but there again, we got to ask the question, if this earth is billions of years old, how far should the Niagara Gorge stretch? Oh, it should have lapped the globe twice by now. But it hasn't, has it? In fact, if we were to look at a textbook, they make a point that, of course, they don't tie back to the Bible, but check this out. Simple calculation shows that it's been 9,900 years since the Niagara River started cutting its gorge back. That's a whole lot closer to my numbers, isn't it? Or how about this one? What about oil? Now, I'm a Tennessee boy. Don't know a whole lot about oil, but I spent a great deal of time in Texas. So let me share with you the one little piece of trivia that I know about oil, and that is never ever place your finger over an oil cap. The reason? Some of that oil is held underground at a pressure as high as 20,000 pounds per square inch. 20,000 psi. Now, to give you an idea of how much that is, folks, your car tires right now are inflated to about 35 psi. This is 20,000. It would literally rip your finger off of your hand. But again, you gotta think critically and ask yourself, how long can sedimentary rock hold pressures that is pushing up like that? Scientifically speaking, less than 10,000 years. All right, where'd it come from? Where'd the oil and the gas come from? You ever thought about the fact they call them fossil fuels, right? Take a look at this textbook. The other two major fossil fuels are petroleum and natural gas. The formation of these two fuels is not yet fully understood. That's an understatement. Both of these are thought to have formed from the decay of organisms that once lived in the sea. The remains of these organisms settled at the seafloor. They were gradually covered by sediment. After millions of years, the remains were slowly changed by heat and pressure. So they would say that all this living stuff was covered over in the sea. Of course, they're adding millions of years, but let me ask you, is there a better explanation of what would have covered everything over? Like, what about that flood? Would that have done it? Moms and dads, let me share with you why what we're talking about this weekend is so critically important. In fact, let me share with you a quote from a guy by the name of John Loftus. He was baptized. He preached for a little while. Then he left the church and wrote a book, Why I Rejected Christianity. I want you to read what the driving force was for him leaving. He said, what has happened to me theologically? The watershed for me, and I suspect others who have changed their assumptions, is the factual and the historical reliability of Genesis chapters 1 through 11. That's it. How many people do you think could echo those exact words? You know, I just can't harmonize Adam and Eve and the flood with what I'm hearing in the classroom. And yet they never stop to ask this question. Do we have evidence for the flood? I mean, think about it for just a moment. If we were to go to some of the highest points on the planet, you know what we're going to find? How about seashells? Aquatic fossils. In fact, this is a picture from one of the highest mountains in Nepal. I have a chance to correspond with atheists on a pretty regular basis. I'll send them a picture just like this. I'll say, hey, how do you explain it? You know what they always say? Local flood. So then I'll send them another picture or three from different continents, different mountain ranges, and I'll say, hey, how do you explain this? You know what they always have to say? Local flood. Local flood that covered like 3 or 4 different continents? That's a big local flood, folks. Have you ever asked why is it that they would not want there to have been a flood? Why do they poke so much fun at it? Folks, I'll tell you why. Because at the root of it, this is a Bible account that is talking about God's judgment on sin. And if you don't remember anything else from this seminar, remember this. Darkness doesn't like the light. Do we have evidence for it? Oh man, Absolutely. We got the Bible. We talked this morning about how we can prove the Bible's inspired. That ought to be enough. But we got a lot of co-workers, a lot of friends who that's not enough. They don't believe the Bible. So do we have other evidence? Obviously, we can point to them. We can show them the shells on tops of mountains. But we also have other civilizations that have put it in record. We can show them, for instance, the record of the rocks, where you've got ancient civilizations that have got flood accounts, like, for instance, the Mayans, the Sumerians, the Greeks, the Hittites, all of which have a flood story that matches up very well with Genesis chapter 6. Or we can talk to them about the Indo-European culture. All of these cultures that trace themselves back to Japheth, Noah's son. In fact, do we have evidence? We go to China, we find out the very first missionaries. They go there, they find out the Chinese people already knew about creation and the flood, and they claim not to be of Chinese descent, but rather from Japheth. Do we have evidence? Oh, I do a whole series on nothing but the flood. You want 2 hours of boredom? You come listen to me be a windbag for 2 hours on the flood. My wife says sometimes I'm long-winded. I know that will surprise y'all. Folks, here's the tragedy. This is a very real account. It quite literally changed the world. And what are we doing about it? Oh man, we're making fun of it. We make movies, we poke fun, and as I mentioned yesterday, we've sanitized the thing. We got little kids' toys, and we got little songs, and yet this literally was the most deadly event to ever strike the earth. Do we really grasp that? Do we really grasp the fact that everything was wiped out? Can you imagine being on the boat and the water is going up and there are those few people that found that one high place and the boat is flowing by and all Noah and his family can hear is the screams of those people who are wanting on the boat? You ever felt like you've been laughed at? Yeah, you ever felt like you're alone in the world? Folks, listen to me. Noah knows where you are. He built a boat for 100 years. And you can imagine the ridicule he felt. And yet, here's what I want to stick in your mind. That piece of wood that was used by God to deliver His elect. 8 people. And it was a foreshadowing of another piece of wood that God would use to deliver His elect. It's a beautiful piece of wood when you think about it like that. But folks, it was not beautiful in the slightest when you really think about what happened. You think about the ark and how stench and filth and total destruction. And then you think of that cross. Oh yeah, we like to think of it today in a sanitized form. Can you imagine? The blood, the sweat, and there's Jesus. Genesis chapter 6, verse 17. Behold, I myself am bringing floodwaters on the earth to destroy from under heaven all flesh which is in the breath of life. Everything that is on the earth shall die. Do not let that just roll off your back like water on a duck. Everything is going to die. And yet, thankfully, Genesis chapter 6, verse 9, there was a guy named Noah. The Bible uses 3 characteristics. It says, number 1, he was a just man. Number 2, he was perfect in his generations. And number 3, he walked with God. And you know what we do today? We make movies and make fun of him today. I only know of about 4 people that you can say walked with God. Enoch being the one that jumps to everybody's mind. Adam and Eve also had that privilege in the garden. And Noah. The text says, basically, If you go by numbers, this dude's a failure. Why would I say that? Because he preached for roughly 100 years. All he saved was 8 people. Can you imagine having a preacher for 100 years and he doesn't convert anybody? Moms and dads, listen to me very, 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 very carefully. At least he got his family on the boat. Think about that. We got a problem in the church, and I'm fixing to tell it to you right now. Here's our problem. We have a bucket, collective bucket, that we're trying to fill up, our church family. So we're trickling people in the top of our bucket through outreach and programs. All the while, we've got a massive hole in the bottom of our bucket, folks, that is much bigger than what we're putting in the top. And you'll know what's coming out the bottom? It's our family. It's time that we plug the leak. It's time that we get our family on the boat. I mentioned yesterday to you that the Bible records the exact time that this flood happened. The reason being is because that particular day would stand out forever in Noah's mind, in Shem, Ham, Japheth's mind, and their children, as they retold this story over and over and over. It made 9/11 look like child's play. And yet, there you got this man. If I were to ask you today, what do you think Noah's reward for righteousness was? Have you thought about it? You know, deep in our minds, this is the way human beings think. We think, you know what, if I'm righteous, I'm going to get something for that. And being humans, you know what we most often think about? We usually think materialistic stuff. Here's a question. Was Noah rewarded materially for his righteousness? Folks, listen to me. I think just the opposite. I think Noah was filthy, stinking rich. We say, whoa, time out. I don't read that in the text. Okay, here's what I want everybody to do. I want you to go home and I want you to build a boat that big.
No.
Go ahead.
No.
Folks, I'm not sure if we collected all the money in this room that's in every account. I don't know that we could do it.
Oh.
So I'll say again, I think Noah was filthy, stinking rich. And he lost every bit of it in the flood. You realize he didn't have anything when it was done, did he? But he got to get on the boat. Number two, we might look at it and we might say, well, maybe children. Maybe children is a reward for righteousness. Because in the old days, we used to understand, yes, children are a blessing from the Lord. Okay, here's what I want you to do. Open your Bible right now to Genesis 5. The genealogies, remember those? Adam begat Seth. Here's two things I want you to notice about it. Number one, it gives the child of record. And then he uses this phrase over and over. It says, and they had sons, plural, and daughters, plural. Okay? You realize that means they had to at least have 5 kids. Every single one of them. Because sons, plural, daughters, plural is 4, plus the son of record. That means every single one of those, from Adam all the way to Lamech, had at least 5 kids. What about Noah? Did he get rewarded with children for his righteousness? Folks, he only had 3. Shem, Ham, Japheth. So we can't say that it's children. So what was it? Folks, I'll tell you what it was. He got to get on the boat. How many times do we look at what is going on around us? Whether we are young or old, and we say, Lord, it's not fair. I'm doing everything you want me to do. I'm using good language. I'm not watching bad shows. And yet they've got more popularity, Lord. They've got more money, Lord. They're not getting on the boat. It's just not fair because they get to wear the fashionable clothes, Lord. They live in that neighborhood. They're not getting on the boat. Their name is known by everybody. And here I am they're getting on the boat. But you are. You and your family. So let me ask you this question. How many of us in this room look at that and we think to ourselves, how could a loving God do that? How could He destroy everything? When really the question is, how could a holy, righteous God not do it? If I were to ask every one of you, if I were just single file and you walk by me and I ask you, who in this room thinks you deserve the ark rather than the flood? What do you think? Who in this room thinks because of your behavior, your actions, your words, you think you deserve the ark and not the flood? Folks, listen to me. We've all done stuff probably within the last week in which we deserve the fires of hell, to be honest with you. Every single one of us. Whether it be our attitudes, our thoughts. And yet, let me ask this final question. How thankful are we that there was another piece of wood that has forgiven every bit of it? If you're not a Christian, I want about 2 minutes of your time. There was a trial that happened about 2,000 years ago in the wee hours of the night. A guy named Pilate was overseeing the trial. He really didn't see anything wrong with the guy that was in front of him. In fact, he tried a couple of different ways to get out of it. But finally, when the pressure started mounting, he had a guy named Jesus scourged. John chapter 19, verse 1. Scourging was a known legal preliminary for every Roman execution because they knew that without a strong condemned men, they'd be on that cross for several days before they finally died from dehydration and exposure. What they would do is they'd take a whip about 5 to 7 inches long. And it'd have several leather straps coming off of it. Tied off at various intervals, there would be iron balls or sharp pieces of sheep bone, pieces of metal. And a position of man for scourging, what they would normally do is they would bind his wrist, they would tie him to an upright post, they would strip him down, and then they would beat that man unmercifully. In fact, historical records tell us that men would, on many occasions, bite their tongue clean in two in anticipation of the pain that was coming. And yet there's Jesus. And he hears the first crack of that whip. And you can just imagine his skin being torn open. And he hears it again, crack! And he hears it again, crack! Folks, I need you to understand. He's in the wee hours of the night looking around and there is nobody there. And he hears it again, crack, and by that time, quite literally, blood washing down his back. His skeletal muscles look like shredded meat. And I need everybody in this room to understand, Jesus Christ didn't have to listen to it one time. He could have called 10,000 angels and been done with it. But he knew every soul in this room needed a spotless sacrifice. So he continued to listen to the crack of that whip, making his way up to Calvary, where he was put on a cross for your sins and mine. If you believe that, what are you waiting on? Folks, he went through that for you. What are you willing? Are you not willing to take a step out for him? If you are here and you're not a Christian, I'm begging you. I tell people, don't walk, run down the aisle. So one time I'll let you run in church. If you believe that he died for your sins and you're ready to repent of them, confess his name, to be immersed for the remission of your sins, you can do that today. For those of you who are Christians, I hope and I pray that our time together has been edifying. I hope it's been educational. I hope it's been encouraging. But I hope it's lit a fire that doesn't go out for a long time. And I hope that as we sing this last song together, you will reflect on your own response towards Jesus Christ on that cross. And if you realize, hey, I need to get a few things straight, I hope you'll come Let's together we stand and sing.